Have you ever felt like something was missing, even when everything in your life seemed perfect? Like you're running a race, but you're not sure where the finish line is. This is the story of Zain, a man who thought he had it all, yet his heart was restless. But one night, a single discovery changed everything. It led him to uncover 5 powerful things that every soul should be asking from Allah. What did Zain find, and how did it transform his life? Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you might just find the answers you've been searching for too. The city hummed with life outside Zain's apartment, a constant rhythm of cars, distant voices, and flickering lights. Inside, the silence felt heavy. Zain sat at his desk, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen of his laptop, though his mind was far away. A stack of papers lay untouched beside him, and the coffee cup in his hand had long since gone cold. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, as if trying to release the weight pressing on his chest. From the outside, his life seemed perfect. A stable job, a promising career, and a network of supportive friends. It was everything he had worked so hard to achieve. Yet, sitting here alone, he felt a void he couldn't explain. He glanced around his apartment, his gaze lingering on the framed certificates on the wall and the neatly arranged bookshelves. These were the symbols of his success, weren't they? But why did they feel so hollow? Why, despite all he had accomplished, did his heart feel restless? That night, lying on his bed, Zain stared at the ceiling, the flickering shadows of the city lights dancing across his room. His thoughts spiraled into a single question: what is it that I'm missing? Zain stared at the journal, his fingers tracing the edges of the worn cover as if it held something sacred, something that had been waiting for him all along. His mother's handwriting on the front wasn't just familiar. It was comforting, like a warm embrace from a simpler time when life's struggles hadn't yet hardened his heart. He could almost hear her voice, soft yet firm, urging him to never forget the power of dua. He took a deep breath and opened the journal slowly, the pages emitting a faint crackle as they separated after years of being untouched. The first thing he saw was a small handwritten note, written with the care of someone who truly believed in what they were saying. Zain, life will sometimes feel heavy, and your heart will search for something it cannot find in this world. When that happens, turn to Allah. These are not just words, they are the keys to unlocking peace in both your heart and your life. Her words seemed to speak directly to him, as though she had known this moment would come. Zain leaned back in his chair, gripping the journal a little tighter as his chest tightened. How had he forgotten this? Why did it take him so long to realize what he'd been missing? His eyes moved to the next page. Written neatly in his mother's unmistakable handwriting was a simple list, but its simplicity only deepened its meaning. Ask for forgiveness, for the mistakes you know of and the ones you don't. Ask for guidance, for the choices you must make and the path you walk on. Ask for good in both this world and the hereafter, because one without the other is incomplete. Ask for contentment, for a heart that finds peace in every circumstance. Ask for protection, from the seen and the unseen, from harm you can't even imagine. Zain's eyes blurred as he read the words again. Each line felt like a whisper to his soul, as if it was peeling back layers of neglect and reminding him of what he had forgotten. Forgiveness. His mind raced through memories he hadn't touched in years, moments of weakness, mistakes he had brushed aside, things he had never truly repented for. He felt an ache in his chest. How could he have been so distant from something so crucial? Guidance. The word seemed to echo in his mind. Zain thought of all the times he had felt unsure, the countless decisions he had made without even pausing to seek clarity from Allah. He had trusted himself, trusted his plans, but never thought to ask for divine direction. Good in this world and the hereafter. Zayn's lips pressed into a thin line. His focus had been entirely on the present, his job, his success, his reputation. The thought of asking for something eternal, something that transcended this temporary life, hadn't even crossed his mind. Contentment. The word felt heavy, almost foreign. He had spent so much of his time chasing more success, more recognition, more achievements, never realizing that peace didn't come from having everything but from being satisfied with what Allah had already given. Protection. His heart sank as he thought of the countless dangers he had walked through in life, some he hadn't even noticed. How many times had Allah saved him from harm without him even asking? Zayn let the journal rest in his lap. He felt overwhelmed, a strange mixture of regret and hope swelling within him. These 5 things weren't just words. They were answers to the void he had been feeling, a map to the peace he had been searching for. The hum of the city outside seemed distant now, as if the world had quieted just for him. Zayn placed the journal gently on the desk, staring at it as though it might disappear if he looked away. His mother's wisdom had found him at the exact moment he needed it most, and for the first time in months, he felt a spark of clarity, a sense that this was his chance to realign his heart with what truly mattered. The journal sat on Zayn's desk like an anchor, pulling at him even as he drifted off to sleep. His eyelids grew heavy, the faint hum of the city outside becoming a distant murmur. And then, as his consciousness slipped, he found himself standing in an unfamiliar place. It was silent, eerily so, yet the air vibrated with an unseen energy. A winding path stretched before him, shimmering faintly with golden light. The ground beneath his feet was uneven, dotted with cracks that revealed a dark, endless void below. The path was surrounded by shadows that seemed alive, shifting and whispering, though no words could be understood. Zayn's chest tightened as he looked around. He had no memory of how he got here, no sense of what lay ahead. But then in the distance he saw a figure standing at the far end of the path. It was cloaked in radiant light, its presence both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. The figure raised a hand, motioning for Zayn to come closer. He hesitated, unsure if he should trust this silent invitation, but a strange pull in his chest urged him forward. As he took his first step, the world around him shifted. Scenes from his life began to materialize on either side of the path, vivid and raw. He saw himself as a child, carefree and full of wonder, sitting at his mother's feet as she taught him how to make dua. Her voice was clear in his memory. Zayn, when you speak to Allah, you open the doors to His mercy. The scene dissolved, replaced by one from his teenage years. He was standing in his bedroom, his face flushed with anger after a heated argument with his father. The words he had spoken still echoed in his ears, sharp, cutting words he had never sought forgiveness for. His father's disappointed gaze burned into his memory, and Zayn felt a pang of guilt that he had long buried. As he continued down the path, the cracks beneath him grew wider, forcing him to tread carefully. The scenes around him became darker, heavier. He saw himself in college, sitting in a crowded cafe with friends. They laughed and joked, but Zayn's laughter had been hollow, masking the emptiness he felt inside. He had been too proud to admit it, even to himself. Another step forward, and a new memory emerged. He was in his office, rushing through his prayers in a small, cluttered break room. His movements were hurried, his heart absent. He had treated Salah as a task to complete, not as a connection to his Creator. The weight of these memories bore down on him, making each step harder than the last. The cracks beneath him seemed to mirror the cracks in his heart, fragile, broken, and in desperate need of repair. Zayn's breath quickened as he approached the figure. It hadn't moved, but its presence felt even more intense. When he finally drew close, it turned toward him, and though its face was obscured by light, Zayn felt its gaze pierce straight into his soul. The figure spoke, its voice soft yet commanding, reverberating through the still air. "You have walked without purpose, Zayn. You have asked without sincerity. You have lived without truly understanding what your heart needs. Do you not see?" Zayn felt a lump rise in his throat. The figure raised its hand, and the shadows around him shifted again. This time he saw moments of protection, moments he had never fully recognized for what they were. He saw himself driving home on a rainy night, his car skidding on the slick road. His heart raced as he remembered the near accident, how he had miraculously regained control. He saw the day he had narrowly avoided falling into harmful company, a decision made on instinct, but one that had shaped his life. He saw opportunities that had seemed to come out of nowhere, blessings he had never paused to be grateful for. Tears welled in Zayn's eyes as the figure spoke again. "You ask for what you see, but Allah gives you what you do not. Forgiveness to cleanse your heart, guidance to light your path, good in this world and the hereafter to balance your soul, contentment to bring you peace, protection from what you cannot see. These are the keys you have neglected, Zayn. Ask for them, and you will find what you seek." The words washed over him like a wave, and the cracks in the path began to glow with a soft golden light, sealing themselves as if healing from within. Zayn fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of his realizations. His heart ached with a mixture of regret and hope. The figure began to fade, its light merging with the horizon, but its final words lingered in the air, imprinted on Zayn's soul. "Ask and trust that he is always listening." Zayn's heart was pounding, though the world around him was now silent. The figure's presence had faded, leaving him alone on the once broken path that now glowed with a soft, warm light. He felt lighter somehow, though the ache in his chest lingered, not a burden, but a longing. Before he could make sense of the emotions churning within him, the world around him began to shift again. The glowing path faded, and Zayn found himself standing in a vast, open field. The sky above was an endless expanse of stars, each one twinkling like a silent witness to his journey. The grass beneath his feet was soft, and a gentle breeze carried the faint scent of something familiar. Jasmine, just like the flowers his mother used to grow in their backyard. In the center of the field stood a solitary tree, its branches sprawling out like welcoming arms. Hanging from its branches were countless luminous orbs, each glowing with a gentle light. Zayn walked toward the tree, drawn to its beauty and the mysterious sense of comfort it seemed to offer. As he approached, he noticed that the orbs weren't just lights, they were memories. One by one, the orbs began to float down toward him, each one displaying a moment from his life. The first orb hovered just before him, pulsing softly, and he instinctively reached out to touch it. The moment it made contact with his hand, he was pulled into the memory. He was a child again, no more than 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on the prayer mat beside his mother. She was teaching him how to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, her voice steady and patient. Zayn had stumbled over the words, frustrated with himself, but his mother had smiled, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's not just the words, Zayn," she had said. "It's your heart that matters most. Even if you don't have the perfect words, speak to Allah with sincerity, and He will listen." The memory faded, and Zayn found himself back in the field, tears streaming down his face. He reached for another orb, and it revealed a different moment, this time as a teenager. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, head in his hands after another argument with his father. He remembered the anger that had burned in his chest, the bitter words he had thrown carelessly. But then his father's voice came to him softly. "Zayn, when you make dua, ask Allah to guide your heart, Pride will only take you further from him. The orb dissolved, leaving him with the weight of those words. Zayn moved to the next orb, his hand trembling now. This memory was from his university days. He saw himself in a dimly lit dorm room, pacing back and forth, stressed about an exam he hadn't prepared for. In his desperation, he had dropped to his knees and made a hurried dua. Ya Allah, just get me through this. He had passed the exam, but the relief had been fleeting. He had never paused to thank Allah, never thought to ask for guidance to better himself. One by one, the orbs revealed moments of his life, some joyful, others painful, all connected by a thread he had never noticed before. Each memory reminded him of how Allah had been present in his life, even when he had been too distracted to notice. Finally, the largest orb descended from the tree, hovering directly in front of him. Its light was so bright that it illuminated the entire field, casting away every shadow. When Zayn touched it, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This memory was different. It wasn't something from his past. It was a vision of what could be. He saw himself standing on the prayer mat, his hands raised in supplication. His heart was full, his words flowing freely, not just from his lips, but from the depths of his soul. The room around him was quiet, yet he felt the presence of something greater, a connection he had longed for but never truly understood. The vision shifted, showing him moving through life with a newfound sense of clarity. He saw himself smiling with his family, repairing the relationships he had neglected. He saw himself helping others, using his time and resources for good, but most importantly, he saw himself at peace, his heart no longer weighed down by regret or aimlessness. When the vision faded, Zayn found himself back in the field, standing beneath the tree. The stars above seemed brighter now, as if the entire universe was urging him forward. A soft voice whispered in the breeze, carrying the same message he had heard before. Ask and trust that he is always listening. The field began to dissolve, and Zayn felt himself being pulled back into consciousness. The last thing he saw was the tree, its glowing orbs flickering like beacons of hope, each one a reminder of the blessings he had overlooked and the dua he needed to make. Zayn stood frozen beneath the glowing tree, his breath shallow as he stared at the orbs swaying gently in the breeze. Each one seemed alive, pulsing softly, holding moments he had lived but never truly appreciated. As he reached for the largest orb hovering before him, its light enveloped him in a warmth that felt like a familiar embrace. Suddenly, the world shifted, and he was no longer in the field. Instead, he stood in his childhood home, the scent of freshly baked bread and his mother's jasmine perfume filling the air. He was in the small living room where so many of his early memories were rooted. On the worn prayer mat in the corner sat his younger self, no older than 6, his small hands raised in dua. The boy's voice trembled as he prayed aloud, words spilling out in an innocent mix of Arabic and broken phrases. Ya Allah, make me good, make Mama and Baba happy. His mother knelt beside him, smiling softly, her hands guiding his. Beautiful, she whispered, her voice rich with love. Never stop asking, Zayn. Allah listens to even the smallest hearts. The scene blurred, shifting again, and Zayn found himself standing in his teenage bedroom. The memory hit him like a wave. He was 15, seething with anger after an argument with his father. The room felt suffocating, his emotions so intense that he couldn't think straight. He watched as his younger self slammed the door, throwing himself onto the bed. Then, in a moment of vulnerability, teenage Zayn turned onto his back, staring at the ceiling. Quietly, almost inaudibly, he whispered, Ya Allah, I don't know what to do. Help me. It was a desperate, fleeting moment, one he hadn't even remembered until now. Yet, in that memory, the stillness that followed felt sacred. The memory melted away, and Zayn was pulled into another moment. This time he stood in his university dorm, his younger self surrounded by chaos. Papers were strewn across the desk, coffee cups piling high. He was overwhelmed, the pressure of deadlines and expectations gnawing at him. Desperately, his younger self fell to his knees, his forehead pressing against the cold floor. The words came out rushed, frantic. "Ya Allah, just let me pass. Please, I'll do better next time." Zayn winced at the sight, recognizing the hollow promises he had made so often in his youth. Yet, the memory wasn't there to shame him. It was a reminder that even in his neglect, Allah had been there. The scenes began to overlap, faster now, a whirlwind of moments, near misses on the road, friendships that had fallen away before they could harm him, opportunities that had come when he least expected them. Each moment was a thread, weaving a story of protection and mercy he had never acknowledged. And then, it all stopped. Zayn was back under the tree, the largest orb still glowing before him. He reached out hesitantly, and this time, the vision it held was not of the past, but of what could be. He saw himself on the prayer mat, his hands raised, not in habit, but with true conviction. His heart was full, his words deliberate. He prayed with clarity, asking not just for what he wanted, but for what his soul needed. The room around him seemed brighter, lighter, as if the burden he carried had been lifted. The vision shifted, showing him sitting with his family, their faces lit with joy as they laughed together. He was present, fully there, no longer distracted by the noise of the world. He saw himself helping others, his hands extended in generosity, his time dedicated to those in need. But what struck him most was the peace in his own eyes, a calmness he hadn't known in years. The orb faded, leaving Zayn alone under the stars. He stood in silence, the gentle sway of the tree's branches like a soothing lullaby. The realization hit him all at once. The answers he had been searching for weren't complicated or out of reach. They were simple, always within him, waiting for him to turn back and ask. The voice from before returned, soft and unwavering. Ask with sincerity. Trust with your heart. He has always been listening. The stars above him pulsed, their light growing brighter until the field dissolved, and Zayn felt himself being pulled back into the world he had left behind. Zayn's eyes fluttered open, his breath catching in his chest as he returned to the familiar confines of his room. The journal was still there, lying on his desk, its weight now symbolic of everything he had just experienced. The dim glow of the nightlight painted soft shadows on the walls, but the room felt different. It wasn't the room that had changed. It was him. He sat up slowly, his mind racing with the visions and the voice that still echoed in his heart. Ask and trust that he is always listening. The words resonated deeply, filling him with a strange sense of urgency and calm all at once. Without hesitation, Zayn moved to his prayer mat, the space that had been neglected for far too long. He knelt down, the texture of the mat beneath his hands grounding him in the moment. His heart beat steadily, and for the first time in what felt like years, he let the distractions fall away. The room was silent, yet alive with an energy Zayn couldn't explain. He raised his hands, palms open toward the heavens, the same way his mother had taught him so many years ago. The words didn't come right away. He sat there, breathing deeply, feeling the enormity of the moment. And then they began to flow, not from his mind, but from his heart. Ya Allah, forgive me. His voice cracked as the weight of his mistakes washed over him. He thought of all the times he had rushed through prayers, the times he had neglected them altogether. He thought of the careless words he had spoken to his father, the pride that had kept him from apologizing. The tears came freely now, each one a release, a cleansing of the burdens he had carried for so long. Guide me, Ya Allah. The words came out soft but firm, a plea for direction in a life that had felt so aimless. He thought of the cracks in the path he had walked in the dream, the moments where he had stumbled, lost and unsure. He wasn't asking for the path to be easy, just clear enough for him to follow. Grant me good in this world and the hereafter. The dua felt different now, no longer just a phrase he had memorized, but a sincere request. He thought of the blessings he had seen in the dream, the protection, the opportunities, the moments of mercy that had come even when he hadn't asked. He realized now that he wanted to live a life of balance, one that nurtured his soul while still embracing the good of this world. Fill my heart with contentment. This request came with a sense of longing, a deep desire to quiet the restlessness that had plagued him for so long. He thought of the peace he had seen in the vision, the calmness in his future self's eyes. He wanted that, not just fleeting happiness, but a true, lasting contentment that only Allah could grant. Protect me, Ya Allah. His voice trembled as he thought of the dangers he couldn't see, the ones that lurked in the shadows of his choices. He remembered the near accidents, the toxic friendships he had narrowly avoided, the unseen hands that had guided him away from harm. This wasn't just a request for physical safety, it was a plea for protection from everything that could lead him astray. As he finished his dua, Zayn lowered his hands and placed his forehead to the ground. The coolness of the prayer mat against his skin felt soothing, like an unspoken assurance that he was exactly where he needed to be. When he finally sat back up, the room felt brighter, though the light hadn't changed. He could still feel the weight of his struggles, but it no longer felt unbearable. Instead, it felt like a reminder, a call to keep asking, to keep trusting. Zayn looked at the journal on his desk, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. It was no longer just a collection of pages. It was a lifeline, a map, a guide to everything he needed to rebuild. For the first time in years, Zayn felt like he wasn't walking alone, and that was the beginning of everything. Zayn sat quietly on his prayer mat, the stillness around him mirroring the calm in his heart. The heaviness he had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a feeling of hope and connection. He glanced at the journal on his desk, its blank pages now holding a deeper meaning. It wasn't just a place for his plans, it was a space to reflect on his journey and the duas that had shaped his life. He opened it and wrote his first thought. Today, I learned how to truly ask, not just with my words, but with my heart, and I trust that Allah is listening. As he closed the journal, Zayn noticed the first light of dawn breaking through his window. The soft glow of the sky felt like a sign, a new beginning, full of promise. He turned to the camera, his voice calm and full of emotion. For years I thought I knew how to ask Allah for what I needed, but tonight I learned that it's about more than just words. It's about trust, sincerity, and knowing what your heart truly seeks. Forgiveness, guidance, peace, protection. These are not just things we need, but the foundations of a meaningful life. He paused, letting the thought sink in. If you feel lost or unsure, just start with your heart. Speak to Allah honestly, knowing He's always listening, even when you can't find the right words. Every dua is a step closer to Him, a reminder that you're never alone. Zayn smiled softly, wrapping up his message. Zayn smiled softly, wrapping up his message. So keep asking, keep trusting, and take that step. Because when the answers come, they'll remind you of His mercy and love in ways you never imagined. With that, Zayn ended the recording. He looked out at the brightening sky, his heart lighter than it had been in years. It wasn't the end of his journey, just the beginning of one filled with trust, hope, and faith. Thank you for watching. I hope this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of sincere dua. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more uplifting stories. And remember, no matter where you are in life, Allah is always listening.